Hello and welcome to Writing Women, the show where I will be examining the women who exist in fiction and the people who created them. This week is the fourth book in Tamora Pierce's Immortals quartet, The Realms of the Gods. If you haven't listened to my episodes on the other books, you can check them out in the Tamora Pierce playlist. Published in 1996, this book had some great company. Also published that year were illustrious titles like A Game of Thrones by George R. R. Martin, the first book in his series which eventually launched the series that swept the world. The Green Mile by Stephen King, which the film adaptation of is one of the first movies that really moved me on a deep level. And Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood, which is my favorite book by that author. It was overall a great year for literature, not least of which because it also gave us The Realms of the Gods. Without any more ado, let's get into the very long story recap. The barrier between the mortal and divine realms has been weakened by the Carthagi mages who had been opening portals through it to attack their neighbors at the direction of former Emperor Ozorn. The barrier weakened by trying to stretch itself over all of these holes, and finally it snaps. Immortals flood the human realms and a great war begins. Ozorn, though at a low point at the end of the last book, has quickly mastered Stormwing magic and is using human armies to try and destroy Tortall and his hated enemies, Dane and Numair. He creates small creatures called Darkings out of his own blood and uses them to spy on the Tortallans and their allies. They are small and hardy, and they can magically transmit images of what they see to Ozorn. He uses them to anticipate the movements of the armies, and his side seems to be winning the war. It is Midsummer's Day during a siege of Port Lagan. Dane, now 16, and Numair leave to take care of a new type of immortal that are destroying everything they touch. They leave the dragonette Sky Song, known as Kitten, behind to help protect the port from attack by wyverns and their poisonous fog breath. Kitten is able to fend them off with her unique dragon abilities. They find these new immortal enemies, called Skinners because they skin things with magic, and are disturbed to see that they're vaguely human-shaped, flesh-covered creatures that move forward with a mindless, all-consuming drive, and everything they touch withers and dies. Nothing the pair do seems to hurt them. Numair tries to close them up in a crevice he opens up in the earth, but they pop right out of the ground. They are completely unfazed by his attacks. At the last moment when all seems lost as the Skinners close in, a portal opens and Dane is pulled through. Numair grabs onto her and is dragged through as well. Dane is mostly unconscious and keeps trying to fight herself awake because she's driven to stop the Skinners. She hears the Badger God promise to get rid of them and settles in to rest, still not really sure what's going on. When she wakes, she finds herself in a nice little cabin, and she's reunited with her mother, who appears healthy and whole. She remembers the last time she saw her mother, cold and dead in their burnt-out home outside of Snoresdale, and is almost overwhelmed. She then properly meets her father, the god Werin, and discovers that Werin and Sarah had pulled her through to the divine realms to save her life. Because of the holiday, they are able to influence the mortal world more than the rest of the year. Numair came through with her, and the gods aren't very happy about it because they were just trying to pull Dane through. Dane meets many gods during her time recovering at her parents' cabin. Traversing between the realms has weakened her body. She discovers that when Sarah died, Werin came for her in the Black God's realm and petitioned the greater gods to make her a goddess so she could live with him. She is now the Green Lady and helps in childbirth and matters of the heart in her old home. The cost of this was that the two of them are basically under house arrest for about 100 years. Dane meets many of the animal gods like Broadfoot, the Duckmole god, and Queenclaw, the cat. Narrator's note: Duckmole is an old word for platypus. It's not necessarily something that Tamora Pierce made up. Werin and Dane are awkward together, and Werin angrily talks to her about her refusal to eat game animals since her experience being hunted. He doesn't feel like any child of a hunt god should be refusing meat like that. The Darkings have followed them into the divine realms, and Dane, not knowing what they are, feeds one of them and is kind to it. Her kindness is what makes them eventually decide to switch sides in the war and help Dane's friends instead of Ozorn. Ozorn's mistake while creating the Darkings was doing it in the divine realms. Werin explains that any creature created in the divine realms cannot have its will bound to its creator. And later on, the animal gods confirm that this is why the Darkings are able to switch sides. Dane occasionally wanders away from her father's cabin and encounters various other divine creatures. She meets many of the other animal gods, and one of them warns her away from a chaos vent. The chaos vents are all over the divine realms. They open into the realm of the god of chaos, Usoe. During one of her excursions to take a refreshing swim, one of the Darkings reports her location to Ozorn, and he sends a Taurus through to her. They are half-man, half-bull creatures who capture women and rape them. Dane is terrified of the beast, but manages to kill it. She apologizes to it, sobbing, and explains to Broadfoot that she hates killing things for existing as they were created. She points out that the Tauros was a sad creature because it was basically made to do what it does, and there aren't even any female Tauruses, so they aren't even making a choice to attack human women instead. That's just what they are meant to do. Dane and Numair argue with the gods about returning to the mortal realms, and after a lot of pushback, they admit that they can't send them back, even if they wanted to, because the holiday has passed and they can no longer affect the mortal realm until the next season. Eventually, though, they do agree to help them reach the Dragonlands, because the dragons have the power to come and go as they please. They are joined during a meal by Rikash the Stormwing. He talks with Dane and explains that many Stormwings refused to join Ozorn because they value tradition and what they were meant for rather than participating in the wars they were made to prevent. He agrees to ask his queen Barja, whom Dane saved from captivity in Emperor Mage, if they will be willing to help the humans cross the Sea of Sand, the most difficult part of the trek to the Dragonlands. The Badger and Broadfoot agree to join the mortals, and Waren draws them a map to their destination. He also gifts Dane with a special bow that he reserves for his favored mortals. It is clear that he is unsure how to be a parent, but that he does really care about Dane and wants to protect her in whatever way he can. They begin their journey and stop first at Temptation Lake. They are warned not to drink from it because if you do, you will be tempted by what you most desire. They sleep, and Dane wakes to see Numair is bespelled and is walking into the lake. She chases after him with the aid of Broadfoot, and they see a creature disguising itself as a beautiful woman is dragging him to the bottom. Broadfoot removes the magic from Dane's sight, and she can see it is really a monstrous creature. They recover Numair, but only barely. They find that there is a chaos vent nearby that is leaking chaos into the lake and tainting it. The animal gods are worried about this. Since her arrival in the Divine Realms, Dane has been having dreams of the battle raging between the gods and the goddess of chaos, whose power is growing and causing the chaos vents to leak out into the areas around them more than usual. The Darking that has been following Dane has become friends with her, and more Darkings start showing up. One of them reports to Ozorn before the other is able to stop it, and he sends a flock of Huroks through to attack them while they're trying to cross the first bridge. Another Darking drops off the Hurok's back onto the bridge to join the others, and Dane and Numair fight off the Immortals. On the other side of the bridge, they interrogate the Darkings and figure out what they are and who they had served. Now there are 3 of them. The Badger agrees to take one of the Darkings with him and find all of the others and explain why they should leave Ozorn's side. Then he's going to bring them to the King and Queen of Tortall so that they can hopefully choose to help as spies for this side rather than Ozorn. The group, now minus the Badger and 1 Darking, press on. They eventually hear a magical sound that disturbs them greatly, and Broadfoot explains that it was the sound of the gate barring some of the 3 sorrows from the world opening. He shows them that slaughter in the form of a hyena, starvation in the form of a mangy dog, and malady in the form of a giant rat have been released. The 2 panic, and Broadfoot offers to hold one of the sorrows with his power. They choose malady as it's the one thing most difficult to defend against. So the Duckmole leaves, and they are alone with the Darkings to finish their journey. They are separated when Numair is carried off by a group of sentient rock creatures, and Dane is knocked into a canyon when the cliffside crumbles underneath her. She crashes through trees and lands, bruised but alive, on the bottom. She unfortunately lands in a Spydren web trap. They come for her, and nothing she does can free her from the trap. She thinks she's going to die when Numair appears and starts blasting the Spydrens. The Darkings help by covering the spinnerets and faces of the Spydrens to suffocate them and stop them from attacking with more web. Numair frees Dane, and they kiss for the first time. Dane is surprised but happy with this turn of events, and Numair explains that he had taken a lock of Dane's hair at one point and kept it as a focus should he ever need to find her. They talk some about what all of this means for the 2 of them, and they agree to table the discussion until after the war. Reaching the Sea of Sand, they are greeted by the Stormwings who have agreed to help. The Queen tells Dane that she wants to repay her for saving them when they were trapped in Carthak. They carry the 2 in slings across the Great Desert. Rikash and Dane talk during the flight, and another Stormwing calls Rikash a human lover. Dane asks Rikash about why the Stormwings were created. She says she knows that immortals come from the dreams of humans, so she can understand things like unicorns or sunbirds, which are beautiful birds who greet the sun in a ritual like a dance, and even having the nightmare that a winged horse could go bad and become a Hurok. But she can't understand why someone would dream up Stormwings. Rikash explains that a human who traveled all over the mortal realms hated the constant fighting he saw and dreamed up a hideous creature that would live by desecrating the corpses of the dead. He said that eventually many groups of humans decided they'd rather not fight, knowing what Stormwings would do to them after, and that even one human deciding not to wage war because of them was enough to fulfill their purpose. He also says that when humans try to bribe them to leave bodies alone so they can war in peace, they go after their bodies first. The Stormwings leave them on the other side and wish them well, but they do not want to get involved if the dragons decide they don't like the intruders. They're faced with a wall of fire and are interrogated through mind speech by a powerful voice. Dane says that she is the guardian of the Dragonette Sky Song, and the dragon voice says that can't be because humans are cowards and dragon guardians aren't cowards. So Dane walks through the fire without hesitation to prove her bravery. Numair follows her through, but he is clearly panicked, thinking that she had walked into her death. They are told to wait for guides and 2 young dragons, Icefall and Steelsings, or as they prefer to be called, Scamp and Grizzle. The 2 are to guide them to their grandsire, and along the way they pester the humans with questions about the mortal realms. They are accosted by an adult dragon, Jewelclaw, a 40-foot-long dragon who tries to take the humans prisoner. When he is thwarted by the authority of Diamond Flame, the grandsire of the 2 younglings who had granted the humans passage, he flies off and says that Diamond Flame will have to answer to the dragon meat. The 2 young dragons are then instructed to take the humans to the amphitheater because Jewelclaw and his group of separatists have called a dragon meet. Dane and Numair confer privately, but decide that they have to press on to get home. The group arrives and is surrounded by even more young dragons who pelt them with even more questions. The group defies the orders of Diamond Flame and accompany the humans into the amphitheater. What ensues is a long, angry debate where the dragons basically just rage at each other. The separatists want the humans dead, and even further want dragons to return to the human realms and rule over them. They accuse Dane of having captured Kitten and that she's keeping her against her will, but Numair points out that there's no cage that could hold any dragon, even if they wanted to cage her. The angry dragons then accuse them of trying to seduce their young, but the young dragons argue back and say that they want to learn from them because they're new and none of them are old enough to have ever even seen a human before the realms were blocked off. Diamond Flame tries to argue that the dragon meat is to decide things for all dragons, but that the humans are there as his personal guests and so they shouldn't be a subject of debate. He is Kitten's grandsire and wants to welcome her guardians. The other dragons refuse to back down, and it comes to a head as Numair gathers his power to fight and Dane prepares to shapeshift and attack the dragons who are advancing on them. Eventually, the ancient dragon Rainbow stops everything. He is furious at the disrespect he's seeing thrown around and supports the decision that the humans being guests is a personal matter. He banishes Jewelclaw from his presence and basically shuts the whole meet down. Dane and Numair briefly interact with Rainbow before speaking with Diamond Flame. He agrees to carry them back to the human realms and get another dragon, Wingstar, who is also related to Kit, to help. Dane is worried about the sickness she experienced moving through the realms, and they say that they are more powerful than the lesser gods who pulled them through before, and they'll be fine. Dane's a little offended at the slight against her parents, but she goes with it. They fly up and meet with the Stormwings, who have decided to join them and help Tortal and their allies so that they can get revenge on Ozorn. They fly through to Chorus, and Dane is confused because Kitten is in Port Lagan. The dragons say that they did this because the Duckmole god is in Chorus, and they want to know why. The battle seems to have ended here, and Numair uses a speaking spell to explain what's going on to those on the ground so they don't attack the dragons. Broadfoot appears to them, and he looks terrible. Holding Malady is taking a great toll on him. The dragons angrily ask him why he is meddling in human affairs, and he explains to them that the god of chaos has a mortal pawn in this war who is helping sow chaos and giving her an edge in the battle with the gods. He points out that the Dragonlands may be separate from the Divine Realms, but that Usoe won't stop at their border when she takes over because she is hungry. The god and dragons have a private mind conversation while Dane and Numair reunite with Duke Gareth the Elder in Bury. They discover that the Queen left once the situation was under control here, taking a fleet to try and break the siege of Lagan. Dane and Numair know that there is a relief force coming to join Ozorn, so they return to the dragons and ask to be taken to it so they can help the Queen. The dragons say that they will actually now be helping the humans themselves because they understand the gravity of the war now. Dane is briefly reunited with the Badger God aboard Theet's ship. He had brought her Darkings to use as spies and remained there with her and his Darking companion. They formulate a plan involving the dragons and Stormwings, and Theet gives Dane the Dominion Jewel to bring to Jonathan at Lagan. Diamond Flame takes her to Lagan while Wingstar uses spells to cover the passage of Theet's army and hide them from the enemy. Dane and Numair say goodbye, both unsure if the other will survive. Numair is preparing to battle a very powerful sorcerer who is on the opposing side. Rakash also stops to say goodbye to Dane. At first, he's a little rude to her, but then he apologizes when she calls him out on it. He tells her that if he gets to Ozorn first, he will try to leave a piece of him for Dane, and then goes to join his comrades. Dane reaches Lagan and gives the jewel to Jonathan. Diamond Flame remarks that Sky Song is much more advanced than the other dragons her age, and says that maybe they should let more young dragons visit the mortal realms. Dane is worried for Diamond Flame, remembering how Flamewing, Kit's mother, died. He reassures her that Flamewing was barely an adult dragon, and that an older dragon is rarely defeated that way. During her time in the Divine Realms, the god of dreams, Gainel, had given Dane dreams to help guide her and explain to her the need to find and destroy Uusoe's pawn in the mortal realms to end the war. This battle will end with that pawn's capture or destruction. Dane scouts the battlefield with her power and sees Raoul of Golden Lake attacked by a giant three-headed snake. It looks to be the end for him, but Rakash swoops in to attack the creature and defend him. The Badger and his Darking also appear to help, and they manage to destroy some of its heads together. In its final attack before it slumps over and dies, it smashes Rakash into a boulder. Dane screams his name, knowing he is dead. As Rakash's queen comes to mourn the loss of her faithful follower, Dane realizes she had considered Rakash a friend, and her heart breaks to lose him. She sees a Stormwing take off from the enemy camp to flee, and knows it is Ozorn. She asks the king permission to follow him, and they try to deny her. They say that they will capture him and punish him, and she points out that's what they all said last time, and then this happened. She shapeshifts and chases after him and yells to get his attention. He turns to look at her, and more enemies rise from the trees behind Dane. She realizes that this was a trap in time to shape change again and fight back. 2 Darkings drop from where they had been perched on her back before she took off and suffocate some of her attackers, but fall to their deaths. Dane furiously finishes off the extras and continues chasing Ozorn. Flying exhausts him, and he's almost out of magic. She changes again to a wildcat and lands on his back, sinking her teeth into the nape of his neck. He plummets to the ground while she uses her rear claws to destroy the skin of his back, and Dane is forced to let go of him. She can't shapeshift anymore, but she's saved by a cloud of gulls who come together and break her fall. Ozorn comes after her on foot, and she is able to get her hands and feet to have claws to fight back against him, but loses grip of the magic. Her fingers and toes turn back into normal human fingers and toes. He taunts her, knowing that she can't shape-change anymore. He approaches, planning to cut her throat with his razor wings when she launches herself at him, stabbing him with the Badger God's claw that stays with her at all times, even through her shape changes. He dies, and Dane destroys the gem he had been wearing on his neck. She sees Uusoe, who comes after her angrily, and both of them are transported to the Divine Realms. The Elder Gods are holding a court of sorts to show their parents, Mother Flame and Father Universe, that the Chaos Queen had gone against their orders to try and best her siblings. The Great Powers are cross with her for disobeying them and cage her in the Chaos Realms. Gainel covers Dane with his cloak, and the Great Gods turn their attention to her. She must decide whether to stay in the Divine Realms and become a goddess, or return to the human realms, never again to cross. The decision is helped by her mother and father, who arrive with regular clothes for Dane, and Sarah tells her she releases her from her promise to return and visit longer. She tells Dane that she has true friends and a good man to return to in the mortal realms, and that they will visit every equinox and solstice. The gods come to a decision on the immortals who remain in the human realms, and they are stopped from punishing the Stormwings by Dane. She stands up to them and says that the Stormwings don't deserve any type of punishment because they were just following their nature, and they would as well punish themselves if they would punish the Stormwings for that. Sarah and Warren are shocked, but the Badger is proud of Dane's audacity. The dragons appear, including Kitten, who is happy to see Dane safe before she waddles over to the great god Mithros and starts yelling at him in the dragon language. The dragons agree to take Dane back to the mortal realms, and she says goodbye to her parents. Warren gives her another bow since the old one was lost. Dane is reunited with all of her friends. She tells them that Ozorn is dead and asks after Numair. They tell her that nobody knows if Numair is dead or not. His battle against the opposing mage had ended, but no one had been able to send a search party for him yet. Dane says to have Diamond Flame explain everything to the humans and mounts her pony Cloud to go find Numair. She's exhausted, but Cloud knows where Dane needs to go. They pass the battlefield and head toward the area Numair had battled the enemy mage. The man he said could have been a Black Robe himself if he hadn't left the university. They come across Numair, and he at first mistakes her for an enemy until she calls out to him. She runs to him and they kiss again, happy to be reunited. Numair asks Dane to marry him. Cloud grumpily tells them company is coming, and they break apart to go meet their friends. Stormwings appear to work on the bodies of the fallen. What a climax, right? There's a lot to talk about, and I'm going to start with probably the most controversial among fans and general readers who aren't diehard fans alike. The relationship between Dane and Numair. Despite how they are my favorite couple in this universe, and I will forever be Team Dane and Numair on an emotional level, I don't think it should have been written this way. Now, if you would prefer to not hear about it because you've argued it to death with people on message boards, skip to the timecode on the screen and it won't be mentioned again after that. You do not have to listen to me complain about this. I'll start off by saying that our current concept of childhood is very different from what it was around the time period these books are roughly set, which is approximately medieval time frame. Though the argument can, and has in many other books, been made that in a fantasy story about dragons and magic in a made-up land, every single thing in that world is up to the author and not any kind of historical accuracy. Our current model of childhood, where children are completely separate development levels from adults, came about roughly in the late 19th century. It was very common before then for people to be married very young. As soon as a girl became fertile in some areas, she was considered ready for marriage. So in that context, a 16-year-old girl falling in love with and marrying her approximately 30-year-old teacher wouldn't be that weird. However, these books were not written in a time period where that is acceptable. They were written in a time period where we understand very well that a 30-year-old teacher and a 16-year-old student starting a relationship is not really a good thing. We all know that Numair is such a great guy who would never try to manipulate Dane or hurt her. He even argues with Dane over that very thing. But the fact remains that these books are intended to be read by young people who see this relationship form and think they are meant to be together because it's just so romantic. The reason that's a problem is that type of romantic idea easily translates to the real world, where teenagers are definitely 100% preyed upon by adult men in positions of authority. A quick Google search will bring up constant stories of teachers who have relationships with students. It's not even just a problem in high school age kids, and the underlying trend is it always is a case of the person with more power and authority manipulating the other, even unconsciously. It is irresponsible to write a romance like this. It just is. Dane could have been aged up some, so she was at least 18, but even then it would still be a little weird. Or maybe Numair could have been a smidge younger, and they meet when Dane is 16 instead of around 13 like they do here. Now, Pierce has addressed this in many ways, saying that it was based on her own love for older men, and that it is set in a time where girls much younger than Dane were getting married, etc. But all those justifications are a little hollow to me, as I have already addressed. There isn't really much she can do about it, of course. The books have been published for decades now, and no power on earth could ever perform that level of retcon. The only thing anyone can really do is acknowledge it as a bad thing and move on. It's a shame because so much of this book is absolutely stunning and amazing, and like I said, it's really hard to not love the two of them together if you are a fan of Pierce's writing. This is one thing that I think myself and a lot of other fans are more forgiving of, though, because of our love for the author. We're seeing her books through rose-colored glasses and would rather justify it than just admit that it was a bad move. I basically have to try and think of Dane as much older to make myself not feel gross thinking about it. Dane even brings up at one point that she's afraid Numair will roll over in bed and see a child where he wants to see a woman, and I just, that's so gross. Because she is still a child. I'm done with that subject for this episode, though. I know it's been beaten to death by comment sections forever and probably will continue to be. I know it may get me some major hate, and I want to be really clear that I am not talking about age gaps in general. My opinions on that aren't really applicable to this discussion. I'm specifically talking about a 30-year-old man in a position of power sleeping with his 16-year-old student. Welcome back to anybody who skipped forward. Now that that's over, there is so much good to say about this book, but a lot of it is praise I heaped on the other books, so for the sake of brevity, I won't go into detail on all of it. The same can be said for a lot of criticism I had of the previous books. The world-building explosion in this book is so heavy, but done in such a fluid way that it doesn't really bog down the narrative. In the Divine Realms, we learn so many details of how things work, but it's through simple dialogue as each scene continues forward. There's never a point where they have to stop and just data dump a bunch of stuff onto the reader. The vast world hinted at through this book makes me want more books about everything here. The political intrigue of the Dragonlands is established with a few very short scenes and conversations. Yet it paints such a vivid picture of the various factions and how they live and interact. The mechanics of Dane's magic are also explored to their fullest here, with her shapeshifting being pushed to an absolute limit as she mixes and matches different parts of her body to different animals in the heat of the moment. She even mentions at one point that she feels sick looking at Uosoe when she shapeshifts because she is the embodiment of chaos, and Dane wonders if other people feel sick watching her shapeshift the same way. This story includes Numair as a driving force more than the last 2 books, but at this point we understand just how powerful Dane truly is, so they are evenly matched in their own way instead of her being in his shadow. Dane even gets the honor of taking down the big bad by utilizing everything she has learned over the last few books. This is one of the greatest series climaxes I have ever read. I thought it when I first read it, and I will double down on that now. The escalation of the conflict happens incrementally book by book, and despite the climax of the last book being the toppling of the palace, somehow this one's climax manages to be even more explosive. Some of Dane's insight in this book is so specific, but also weirdly relatable. At one point, she's naked after shape-changing while she's trapped in the Spydren's web, and she remarks that she needs to get her clothes back on because it's really difficult to feel brave when you're naked. Anyone who has lived alone and heard a weird noise while they're in the shower knows the exact feeling she is describing. Rikash is in my top favorite side characters. He is so wonderfully well written, and I wish more authors would take note of how you turn a misunderstood enemy into a grudging friend, with him as an example. His insight into the Stormwing's origins is almost heartwarming. You can see that he cares about their purpose. I actually felt a bit choked up when he tells Dane that Stormwings make it so humans can't lie to each other about how glorious the death of a warrior is. Also, the way the Stormwing Queen is described is a great example of describing an older woman in a story without doing the kind of gross, she used to be a beauty but now she's old thing that you kind of often see. Instead, she's described as having been beautiful in her youth and that age had added majesty to her appearance. That seems so much more respectful to the character and doesn't put her in the position of seeming somehow different or lesser in terms of appearance just because she's older. Pierce is very good at distinguishing between characters' speech patterns without writing in heavy accents to the speech. There are a few things Dane says, like her use of the word fair, for instance, that come off as really country. Her mother does it too, and you can see that it's kind of a regional thing, and it's a nice, subtle way to reference her origins without having to slog through a written country accent. Random thought, somehow I always thought Spydrens were bigger, but their main bodies are only around 5 feet tall, average human height. For some reason, I had this memory of them being giants, more like 10 to 15 feet tall, towering over people. I don't know why I had that thought about them, probably because I was really scared of them when I first read this book. I think they might even be why I am kind of afraid of spiders. Pierce says that Dane was inspired by her own experience as a reclusive person with a love for animals, and I think it really shows in the care taken with Dane and her companions. Her character could only be written by someone who genuinely loves animals and believes them to be individuals with their own personalities. Gainell, she says, was inspired by Neil Gaiman's Sandman, and now as an adult who has read that stuff, it makes a lot of sense. I can see the inspiration there. I'm very sad to be finishing this series, if I'm honest, but I comfort myself with the knowledge that Dane appears as a supporting character in future books. Next time is going to be another one-off episode, though. At the rate I'm going, I'll be through all of her books before summer is half over. Thanks a lot for joining me. If you liked this video, please remember to like it and subscribe if you're interested in seeing more. If you have anything you want to add, or if you disagree with me at all, I'm sure some of you do, I would love to discuss this book more in the comments. If you'd like to support me on Patreon, then please go to patreon.com/writingwomen. Thank you to my current patrons, Mary Doc Brandybuck, Ms. Psycho, Amy Chu, aka The Doctor, and Bruce.